Google reviews is not a operational get better strategy. It is a marketing strategy.
Gotcha.
Pure and simple, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to help you get better. It's going to help you get better reviews and get more people in the door.
Yeah.
This is a, how do we get better strategic, better operations?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a great distinction. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you want to see bad scores on this, right? Because you want to see the warts. And we ask questions in a way that's easy for us to see the warts without being exposed publicly.
Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. In each episode, we bring together leaders from optometry, optical dispensing, and business to share insights, practical strategies, and the latest developments shaping independent practice today. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore how innovation, collaboration, and smart business thinking can drive growth, enhance patient care, and strengthen the future of independent optometry. Whether you're a student, an early career professional, or an established practice owner, The Focused View is your go-to source for knowledge, inspiration, and connection. The Focused View is brought to you by Vision Connection, supporting independent eye care professionals across Australia through collaboration, education, and business growth. By working closely with leading suppliers and industry partners, Vision Connection offers unique opportunities that help independents stand out and succeed. To find out more, visit their website, visionconnection.com.au.
On today's episode, I'm joined by Ankit Patel. Ankit is an entrepreneur, a multiple practice owner, and the founder of My Business Care Team. He's based in the US and he comes at optometry from an angle that most people in our industry don't. That's because his background is in industrial engineering, which means he tends to look at a practice the way an engineer looks at a system. Where are the bottlenecks? What's being done twice? What should the people in the building actually be spending their time on? The thing that drew me into this conversation is that most independents are running their practices on instinct and habit, not design. Centralisation, process design, separating the admin layer from the patient-facing layer. None of these are new ideas in business. They're just rarely applied to the independent practice space. And when they are, the practice changes shape. Ankit has done the work of applying them, and he's seen what changes when you do. We get into how he thinks about leverage in a practice, the metrics he actually pays attention to, and where independents tend to leave efficiencies on the table. We also get into how to build something scalable without losing the patient experience that makes independence worth backing in the first place. There's lots in this one for any owner who's ever felt like the practice runs them rather than the other way around. So let's get into it. Ankit, welcome to the show. Really excited to have you.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, really excited about it too.
Just for the context of the audience, can you tell us a bit about your background, I guess prior to optometry, and talk us through how you got into the industry?
Yeah, so my background is not optical at all, actually. I married into it. My wife's an optometrist, and that's how I got into the business. My background is actually industrial engineering. So I worked at, Lean Six Sigma for large manufacturing companies like Dell, Delta Airlines, Cleveland Clinic, and healthcare some. And I had my own consulting company doing that type of work for smaller businesses too. Met my wife, we had kids and wanted to get off the road. So we bought a second practice in the US and rest is history. I've been in the business since.
And your wife was an optometrist, is that correct?
Yep. She's an optometrist. She still is. Yeah, she still practices. We have a couple of locations still. So yeah, she enjoys it.
And just for the context, the stores are private practice? Is it part of a larger group, or what are the contexts of the stores?
No, 100% private practice, sole owner. Basically just her and I owners.
Yeah. Okay. And again, for the context, the size of the team, how many staff members are a part of it? How many optoms work there, optometrists?
Yes, not a huge operation. We have two doctors, 2 locations, full-time each, right? Staff, we have about 7 in office and in addition to the 2 doctors, and then we have another 6 or 7 remote.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. And obviously something that you've been able to do is bring in a lot of operational efficiencies, and that's obviously the context of a lot of our conversations today, and using that, I guess, as a growth lever. And with that in mind, coming into optometry from an adjacent industry, how did that shape the way you thought about practice management when you started to get involved in the practices from that management point of view?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I look at it from the perspective of what's valuable. And so from a manufacturing standpoint, it's usually like faster, cheaper. The interesting thing though with the optometry, at least the model that we wanted to go with in the US here with my wife, was more high touch. So now actually it's more valuable to slow down, to spend more time with patients. People would come to us specifically because we took more time. And so I think those were some interesting things that we wanted to work around. So we use that as our true North Star, and we optimize around the patient experience. So what does that mean? Well, it has to be more boutique, a little more high end because we have less volume. And so all of our processes, systems, inventory, all that has to support that model.
And I guess how did that evolve from supporting a single practice? And you mentioned that you bought a second one relatively quickly to what it is today. And I guess encompassing then the multiple locations, I guess, is a extra layer of complexity.
Yeah, and so we've bought a total of 5, and
Wow.
we've consolidated down to 2. And so we would, as practices around us were going, there were smaller ones, and we were able to integrate them. And so it's been quite a journey. Some of them we try to keep open and realize it wasn't financially, it didn't make sense. And so we did some interesting things, creative things. Like when we had 4 locations at one time, we started centralizing operations. Mm-hmm. So centralizing phones, centralizing in the US insurance and billing, centralizing recalls, reactivation. So anything we could centralize, we started to centralize.
Mm-hmm. And I guess just as an extension of that, how did you identify what you could centralize and what you couldn't centralize?
Honestly, it was a question of what has to be done in front of the patient,
Okay.
And even that, is that true? And questioning those assumptions. And reality of it is, even in the US, you don't even have to have the doctor there present in some states. Mm-hmm. You can have that remote as well. So that's really what it was. And so we just went line item by line item and what made most sense. And when we started getting creative by thinking that way, we actually introduced new things that we could do. Right. So for instance, patients would call us asking us, where are my glasses? Where are my contacts? And so instead of, saying, well, I don't know, we have to go find them. Well, now we have someone remote just call the labs and get a status and put an estimated ETA. So when they call, it's right there in the notes. So something as simple as that.
Yeah.
But our in-office team, we would never do that because that's a lot of admin time that we wouldn't necessarily want them to do.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point. And it's not one I thought of from the outset, which is, so many of those activities I initially thought of, and I'm sure our listeners are the same, are thinking about customer-facing activities. And, those, I guess, repetitive tasks that are required from an admin level. But there is so much of the organization and business that's supply focused that is admin too, which is generally thrown onto the receptionists or the dispensers out there, that we call them dispensers, opticians with regards to, the states and what terminology you use. But there is that component too. So I could totally see how that would help centralize and I guess work on that efficiencies. And something that I really appreciate on what you touched on was that the whole point of knowing, I guess, who your market really is and the high touch requiring the slowdown. And it's not something that comes naturally to business owners. It is very much almost the opposite. I think more and more now this concept of value and what is value and how do we as an organization create that value for our patients and for our customers, I think it's becoming more prevalent. So it's interesting that you touched on that too. I guess, some of the challenges that you would have faced as the practice grew would have been operational in nature. And when you started to grow, what were some of those challenges that really started to emerge as, I guess, consistent challenges that would have then formed, I anticipate, that centralizing or, efficiencies that you started to create?
Yeah, everything gets magnified, especially if the system and processes aren't tight. And then honestly, you're still dealing with people. It's a people heavy business. And so that was the biggest area of contention was like, hey, how do we know someone is going to be doing what we need them to do proactively, right? How do we know that we're getting all the work done? How do we know, how do we have enough staff that makes sense, but not overspending, right? And so the staffing piece was the biggest part of that, I think. As we grew, that was probably the biggest pain point.
And I guess from the point of view of the front of house and patient communications being one of the bottlenecks that you would have identified, I'm sure. How did that communication bottleneck and what were some of the decisions, I guess, that were made to streamline that and to centralize that? How was that, I guess, identified? And then how was that improved?
Yeah. So it goes back to our ethos. Look, is it delivering world-class service, right, to our patients? And so when we took the phones out and, it kind of made a disconnection point of, we made the decision mainly because of consistency and reliability, because we were noticing things like, hey, recalls weren't getting done at our locations. all of a sudden we would get people scheduled at the end of the day, right? Because people want to leave early. So when the office had control of their own schedule, we saw inconsistency across the board. And so we needed that consistency for a good operations. By doing that, though, it was a trade-off because it would remove the client or patient touch point by one step, right? Centralizing the phones, kind of, they're not talking to someone who's in the office anymore, right? And so that was a bit of a concerning thing that we've been kind of working through how to actually make it still feel like a world-class process, but still have the advantages of a centralized operation that's scalable. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of this is around scale, right? So that's why we made the decision. How do we scale high touch? And that's ultimately what we're talking about here. And those are things that are really not too easy to do, to be honest, in a lot of cases. So our doctors, we have to hire for a certain type of doctor who will practice a certain way, communicate, build trust, really educate patients. And so we're looking for people that can do that and talk and feel comfortable doing that. Not everyone does, and so that's always a challenge of how do you scale that high touch piece was the biggest thing that we've run into.
Yeah. And what were some of the, findings from, that path that you started to go down, and what were some of the conclusions that you formed in negating that challenge?
Yeah, look, in some aspect, the patients will be forgiving because they have the relationship with the doctor, right? If that is there, they'll forgive you for a lot of mistakes and a lot of issues, right? And that's what we're seeing with a lot of the things that we've tried over the years. They've been pretty forgiving for us, for the most part, in terms of how we operate. And so we've been really enjoying the benefits of having that relationship with the patient and having that relationship the patient has with the doctor. And so, yeah, we make mistakes all the time. We still do because we try new things. We're always trying different things. And so when we look at, I'm going to oversimplify this, but if you're looking at it as an investment, right? Like you want an ROI, whether it's a time ROI, money ROI, patient experience ROI, everything you do in the business, everything we do in the business, we want to have an ROI of some kind. And we have to kind of tie it back. And if it doesn't have that, why are we doing it? Right? And sometimes there's competing ROIs. Hey, this is going to make us better financially, but it may reduce our patient experience. Is that something we're willing to try and test out? Yes. Okay, great. Or no, we're not going to do that. A good example might be, if we really were looking at just pure dollars and cents, we would shorten our appointment times. And that's something we just don't want to compromise for patient experience in our process and the way we have set up. So that's one example.
Yeah. And I think what I can make of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, you just said a lot of the trust carries with the doctor or the optometrist in the case of Australia. And so if you shorten that time, that will affect the trust component that seems like you're relying on from that point of view. So allowing the time, and we, again, from the outset, you're talking about those touch points and the high touch points and the value in slowing things down. There are some components that you've identified you can spend more time on, and there are some that you can't. And that strategic trade-off, I think, is quite smart. And I feel like, to me, it's clear that you obviously haven't come in from optics, because it would be fair to say that, from my observations, that's not necessarily something that's trained, whether you go through the dispensing or the optician's path, or whether you go down the path of the doctor optometrist path. That business acumen side of things is not necessarily there, but there are organizations that can assist in that. And obviously the one that you have over in the States is one that does this. But specifically for the context of the majority of our listeners, and I feel like this particular episode will really go out to a practice manager that is responsible for improving operations, maybe, strategically analyzing and creating new standard operating procedures and, identifying bottlenecks. It's fair to say that not a lot of Australians have the issue of buying 4 or 5 practices and centralising it from that point of view. But I think from the context of, thinking of a one-off store, which has maybe 4 or 5 staff members, and maybe 2 optoms in that instance, what can they do to start to identify internal friction points as opportunities to systemize? And I use the word centralize, but centralize from the point of view of creating a process and a structure and a strategy around that.
Yeah. So this is how I'll give you a couple of different ways to approach a problem, a couple of different models. One model I'm going to take is called, in manufacturing world, it's called first pass yield. So what does that mean? Let's say we break down the phone experience, the front desk experience, to the workup, to the exam, to the optical. Those are all discrete experiences. Come up with a definition of what you want as good. We call it a world-class experience. And honestly, we have some definitions for it, but look, when something's world-class versus not, right? It feels good, right? Ultimately, that's the litmus test. So we ask our team, how many patients got world-class experience at the check-in process? Out of the 20 that came in today, maybe 10 of them. Okay, great. Now that's half. How many of the 20 patients that came in today had a world-class experience in the workup? We did pretty good there. I'm going to go 18. Okay, great. Now, how about the doctor? You know what? They were also really good. Let's go another 18 there too. And opticianing. Well, people got checked out in optician. Okay, they were good. About half of them, about 10, right? So then what you do is you say, okay, now if they call it first pass yield. So what you do is you multiply those ratios out. So I would literally take I had 50% on the front desk. I had, what was it? 18 out of 20 on the tech. Same thing with the doctor. And then about half of those people at optician. So you multiply all that together. And what that comes out, I just did the math here real quick. It came out to about 20%. So that means that, even though you had a lot of people have good experiences at different parts, only 4 out of 20 people had a really world-class experience throughout the whole process. Okay. And so then you go in, okay, where were we lowest and why were we that way? Okay, great. Why weren't we able to deliver that at the front desk? Well, the problem is the front desk person was busy answering the phones, right? And they were having to choose between greeting the patient or talking to the person on the phone. They chose the phone half the time because we need more appointments. So that's what they decided to do. And they just said, hey, excuse me, hold on 1 second, which is a normal response. But that's not world-class, right? That's not what we want. And so that's a great place to start, right? How can we remove that out and redesign that part and increase that from 50% to 80, 90, 100% of the time? And that's what we look at. Now, there's a lot more there as well, usually around training and development. But what we found was when we took admin tasks, so all those, that example, we look at everything, right? Opticians, what do they do for admin? Can we take it off the place? Once you take all the admin piece off, then it comes down to the human interaction side. How good are you at that? And then you can just focus purely on that from a training perspective, from accountability perspective. And that becomes way easier to say, it becomes very clear if the person is a good fit for that or not, right? It becomes very clear if, hey, what should we be measuring here? Once you start removing all the ancillary stuff. Right now, way most practices are designed, at least in the US, folks can hide behind admin work. It's like, oh, we got busy with this, or we got busy with that. I couldn't do this, or I couldn't do that. I got too busy for my admin work, or my admin work kept me too busy for patient care, right? Which one do you want me to do? And then the reality of it is 9 times out of 10, that's not true from what I can tell. If I were to be there, and not necessarily because they're trying not to do a good job, but it's more of it's hard to sequence the job unless you have someone looking over it and understanding the sequencing. And so those efficiencies happen when you have all these different tasks that you're juggling. So what we noticed was when we looked at it from that perspective, okay, now we look at it from the model of how many things are you juggling at once? How much are you multitasking? And the more you're multitasking, you need to stop getting away from multitasking and start getting into one task at a time. Yeah. And ideally, it's all patient driven in the office. So you should be working on patient stuff. And they should be sequenced out. If you're not working with a patient, we know there's a gap here because the way the timing is working, this is what you're going to do with that time. But guess what? You only have this much time to work on it because a patient's coming around after that. And so let's get back to a patient and just work on that. And so we try to get away from multitasking to single tasking.
There is so much gold in what you just said there. And I honestly think there's an episode in that in its own right, because I've got about 50 million questions to ask from that. But as I hear it, what you've been able to do is, I guess, create different departments within, or steps or processes within the overall organization and its, I guess, workflow. And then within that, start to be critical and analytical about all of the touch points or all of the interaction points, and then come up with this metric. Just out of interest, because I do want to speak about metrics next, and that's a really good segue into it. You know, that first part yield, I guess, is a really good example of that. But are you doing this continually as a review process? Do you involve the whole team in all of this? Is it something that you know, how does the actual mechanics of the monitoring of this actually occur? And then we'll step into some of the other maybe, you know, ratios and metrics that you keep in check so you can identify these types of opportunities.
So I actually wrote a book on this, like how to actually do that. It's on Amazon, but basically, not the entire book, but like part of it. Basically, it's about accountability. So if have you heard of traction? And if your audience heard of the concept, the book Traction?
I've heard of it. I don't know much about it. Okay. So if you want to give it a bit
I'll give you a quick primer on it. Yeah, it's common here in the U.S. It's based off of what's called entrepreneurial operating system. Long story short, Traction is just about how do you get your business aligned. So a couple of key concepts that are critical for us were the accountability chart and the people analyzer.
Right.
So the accountability chart is not an organization chart. What it is that it's who's accountable to what and how is it structured. So usually there's, especially in small organizations like an office, one person is going to have multiple accountabilities. And as you grow, you can spread it out and split it up. So if you're sometimes your tech and optician are the same people, right? Your work company opticians are the same people, and your front desk, right? So you might have dual roles. And so your accountabilities are, you have two different boxes for what's expected for the front desk and what's expected for the technician who's working up the patient. There's different metrics and different responsibilities there, but they're responsible and accountable for both of those. And so that's how you decide who to include in that. And they both have metrics, right? And so front desk might be, hey, you got all the stuff checked in, you verified the demographics, and in the US, you did all their insurance. The tech is you did a proper handoff, collect all the information, did all the tests properly, that type of thing, right? And if they're doing both those roles, you're holding them accountable to both of those. And so when you figure out who needs to be involved, who's accountable for it, right? And then there's another tool called People Analyzer, which is amazing to use because it does two things. There's two parts to it. You have your company values that you rate people against, and then you have the job that they're supposed to do that you rate them against. So our company values, our office are, we use the word care. The C is curiosity, A is always on stage, R is relentless, and E is elevate. So we have definitions for what those look like and specific verbal definitions, right? And so we can say, do you follow it 80% of the time? Do you follow it 60% of the time or less? So it's a plus, minus, or minus. Guess what? You have to have 3 pluses and 1 plus minus as a minimum to stay on the team, or else you're not a cultural fit, right? And that becomes very easy to say, like, look, this is what we need as behaviors from you. That's what's expected, or you can't be here. Then we have the job function, and they call it get it, want it, and capacity. And those are yes, no. Get it is, let's look at the accountability chart. What does the job function say you're supposed to do? What are the metrics? Do you hit those? Yes or no? Simple as that. And do you want it? You're really showing that you really want it. And do you have the capacity from a education standpoint? Do you have the certifications, time perspective? If you want to be a manager, you got to put in the time, right? Do you have the capacity in other ways, right? You can define that a lot of different ways. So if any of those answers are no, that's not the right seat for the person. And from a cultural standpoint, if they don't meet your bar, then they're on the right bus. So this gives you a way of kind of understanding, hey, who's the brilliant jerk? They're terrible culturally, but they can do a great job. Who's the person who's just in the wrong seat? They're amazing culturally, but they just can't do the job properly. So we need to find a new seat for them. So it kind of helps understand where to put people and how to organize people. And that's a great way of just off the shelf way that people can use and read and find out about.
And what was the name of your book? Because I feel like that might be something we want to reference, and we'll have in the show notes as well if people want to check it out.
It's called Optometry Redefined, and it's on Amazon. And if you folks can't get it in Australia, just ping me. I'll be happy to send out a PDF copy or something. Yeah.
No problems at all. Yeah, we'll have a chat about that and see if we can make that available too. That sounds really, really interesting. And I obviously love when there's further educational components that people can explore, and it might pivot or change their mentality on how they're approaching something. And those two examples that you've mentioned highlight that. And it's the whole premise of the podcast, to be fair with you, where we want to introduce new ideas and new concepts. And from how the conversation is developing, these principles are quite simple in nature. And there's no aha moment necessarily. It's more like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. And when it's like that, it's easier, I feel, to replicate in practice and hopefully get some benefit out of. So, I think a lot of what we're talking about here is really powerful. What do you think independent practices struggle with most or misunderstand the most when it comes to operational efficiencies?
So that's a pretty big question. So I would say it depends on the model they're practicing.
Okay.
So in the US, we have several different models of practicing. So you have the independent full scope practices. And even within that, there's different versions of that. So you can be heavy medical, you can be heavy government plan, you can be heavy optical, right? In addition to that, you could be like a referral center, like a specialist. And then you have your leaseholders, which are people here like in stores where they just do the exams, but no optical retail. So there's a couple different ways, but the biggest thing is knowing which business you're in and what are the controlling variables for there. So similar to what we talked about, how we want to be a world-class experience. The reason why we want to do that is because of the environment that we're in. So we're in a very competitive market. There's 20 people around us just from a stone's throw away, right? People don't have to come to us. So how do we differentiate and what kind of business are we in? If we were in the rural area of town where there's no competitors, we'd be a very different business, right? We would not operate the way we're operating now because that's not what the market demands. So I think it depends on the constraints that are there in front of the people. Usually it is knowing the business and managing the people, right? And knowing who you are and really what you need to be and how do you get the people and the operations to support that. So sometimes people will come in, they'll say, oh, this person over here, they worked in rural America and, they did great. They saw patients every 10 minutes. That's what I should do in a big city where I have a lot of competition and all these optical boutiques around me, right? That's not necessarily the right way to go about it. You gotta kind of understand the market and what your needs are. It might be, but asking like, hey, what is a market demand and how do I operationalize that for my needs and what I want to accomplish?
Yeah.
And getting the right people on board to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And what I love about the strategic approach is if you adopt that mentality, you actually don't identify your competitors that you would perceive originally to be your competitors to be your actual competitors. Because when you understand that philosophy, it's almost like I'm different in my way, and I might have an optometry practice within a certain kilometer radius from me, but the way they do things is different to me. And so although we're selling the same product, it's a different experience, and that becomes your point of difference. And that's what you then highlight and promote and makes you, not to yourself perceive yourself as a competitor, although, maybe to the eyes of the customer, maybe, but you don't see it that way. And I think it's a really powerful mindset to adopt. And then obviously to have the process there to understand a little bit of, you can only control what you can control too. And depending on the scope of your environment and understanding what that is will dictate how much you can change and how much you can't. And obviously from a full scope independent optometry practice, which is where we mainly are dealing with and who I think we're primarily speaking to here, they do have that availability to create that as much as they want to without limitation. Yeah. And I, like you, have a different definition of even independence, because for me, there are real genuine independence, but then there are also pseudo independence that are governed by, in some capacity, one way or another, a group or a set of circumstances that dictate their decisions. And so it's interesting when you start to be analytical about the actual makeup of the store, the point of differences that allow it to function in. But I think having a recognition of that and who you are, I think at the outset is critical to then, tying into all the other things that we're mentioning here and getting the most value out of.
And you all have spec savers, correct?
We do.
Australia?
Indeed.
Yeah. So we don't have it in the US, but we have plenty of people like spec savers. And honestly, in our offices, we made a conscious decision to be the anti-spec savers equivalent, right? And so we don't want to attract that same person because we don't want to compete. We're never going to outcompete them. So we want the people that they're not going to attract, right? So we focus on building community relationships, building relationships with people, making a high touch, high experience, right? And then people tend to trust us more. And honestly, our pricing is not that different, right? No. For level of quality, it's pretty comparable. We just don't offer like the super cheap stuff.
Yeah.
We just have a floor of what we offer.
You tend to find that that's just a marketing ploy in any case, and not just that particular company that you mentioned, but the companies that act in that fashion. It's just a lead generator. You get them through the door, and if you actually analyze how much they've spent as they've walked out, it probably won't be much different, to be fair. And if they are walking out with what the advertised rate is, then I'm pretty sure you can guarantee their staff are getting a do-over and a retraining and got to meet these numbers, and it's coming from a completely different place and ultimately probably coached or managed out of this situation too. So yeah, definitely. I think that mentality is definitely starting to foster in the community now. And it's almost like you appreciate a spec savers next to you because you don't want that customer necessarily.
It contrasts. Okay, this is really what it's like. I was like, oh wow, I could have that instead. Like, no, I don't want that. I want this. I want you, doctor.
Yeah, exactly. And what we've started to see happening more and more is independent practice owners actually networking with the Specsaver store because the Specsaver store knows that they can't meet that demand. And if that happens, they'll rather offload it. And it's the same vice versa. So we probably don't have what you need, which is the hardest thing to do in sales, to say no. As independents, we generally have a mentality of, said, we've got something for you. And I think the more defined you are with what you offer and confident in what you offer, it allows you to be really focused in on that and then turn business away when it's not the right business for you, because that in turn makes you happier and more fulfilled. And we're probably speaking on a bit more of a general concept here, but there's a lot of power in that.
Oh, I'll tie it into something real, right? So like one of the things that we did is, I don't know if this happens there, but SKU simplification, right? So in the US with insurance, that you can have like 5 different tiers of anti-reflective coating.
Right.
We don't offer one. That's it, right? So things like okay, 15 different progressives. Like no, we offer like 2 or 3 max. And so we create like pack. It's like okay, you got to simplify the operations, make it easy, make it give the folks in the range, but have a floor. simplify the SKU, make it simple for everyone to understand. Because how long do opticians go to training for learning how to, like, do you think patients are going to understand all these details within 30-minute exam, right? No, it takes years to understand all this stuff at a deep level. And so how do you make it simple enough to communicate to your client and build trust? I think that's the one thing people don't do is build trust.
Right. And I feel like that's a lot of what you're doing in your operational, advancements and, what you're doing with your efficiencies. We've been speaking about the admin side of it, but we've just touched on how you're looking at it maybe from a product offering point of view too. So that's systemized into a way that's easily translatable so that you can communicate about it accordingly and develop that trust, which in turn fosters that community that you're trying to build and that you resonate with. With regards to the metrics, we've spoken about that, first part yield. Am I saying that correctly? First part yield?
Oh, yeah. First pass yield.
First pass yield. Yeah,
I think that's what you're saying. Sorry. I'm having trouble with the accent sometimes.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to double check. But what are the metrics, I guess over and above the standard ones that in the industry we're very, accustomed to, which is, like multiple pairs and, conversion rates and, the new customer percentages. What other metrics do you analyze or you look to, like the one that you've just highlighted, which might, give us a different perspective on things?
You might be, if you use this, tell me, but dollar per doctor chair hour.
Yep. Yeah.
That one. Okay. Yeah. Dollar per square foot. That's a good one too.
Right.
Here's one that's not looked at as much is net promoter score.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like your pseudo NPS, but NPS is calculated differently. It's not an average.
Right.
So I'll explain what it is for people. So the true NPS score, and this is the traditional way, it is saying from 0 to 10, how likely are you to refer classic vision care to your friend or colleague or family?
Yep.
If they say 9 or 10, you're a promoter. You get a promoter score. If they say anything 6 or less, you're a detractor. They're probably actively talking bad about you. Right. And everything in between is neutral. So what you do, the way the formula works is and I'll have to double check this, but I believe this is it. So you take the promoters, which is your 9s and 10s, add them together, divide that by the total number of views. So let's say, I'll use an example. We have 100 reviews, right? Let's say we have 50 that are promoters, they're 9 and 10. So 50%, right? Or 0.5 or whatever it is. And then what we do is we subtract out the detractors. Let's say we have 30 people that rated as a 6 or less, right? And so that is actually 0.3. Right. And so what happens is that now our net promoter score is basically a 20 out of 100. And the score can be negative 100 to 100. And so a 20 is like, okay, that's not great. And world-class organizations are 80 out of 100. Most healthcare organizations are 60. But if you were to take that score, right? And I did a rough equivalent of what that might be, you're looking at something like, you're looking at something that's probably going to be closer to like a 7 or 8 on an average score based off the distribution I just gave you, right? Because you might get a lot of 5s and 6s. They're just an average experience, but you got a bunch of 10s, 9s and 10s. And then you have the 7s and 8s that get completely discarded, right? They're just neutral.
Yeah.
And so that's a best indicator of how good your office. And so you can actually do pseudo net promoter scores. So, if it's 1 through 5, just take your 4.5s and 5s as net promoters, and then, 3s and less detractors, and do the same calculation.
Yeah.
And it gives you an idea of how good something's actually happening and a feeling.
Right. It's probably not something that's, as far as I know, that's discussed so much in the optical space. I'm aware about it from other business verticals that I'm involved in, but it's a really good point when it comes to reviews. And I imagine that this is something that is sent via your team, post the experience. And would it be fair for me to assume that that's done by the centralising admin, that team that you've developed? Is that something that's managed by
them? And there's tech. Most people have tech that do this, right?
Yeah.
You can just send a survey score out. It's not. It doesn't have to be done by that. Yeah. It's best if you get them on. Look, if you get them on the phone, you'll get some insight.
Right.
But if you really want a true net promoter score, just send them a survey.
Right. And I think that's the key to it. It's the survey that happens after, whereas a lot of us are focused in on this Google review, concept. And what we're doing as a store and the stores is pushing Google reviews. I mean, that in itself is highly questionable, because in Australia, you've got to be very careful with reviews when it comes to healthcare. I'm not sure if it's the same in the States, but what's interesting about this is not necessarily publicly promoted or advertised. This is more for internal usage, and it can be quite constructive in what you've mentioned. So I think that as a concept is, if people are listening to this, is something to explore and mapping out what that could look like. And what I might even do, if it's okay, I might actually provide maybe a bit of a sample for the audience to come and look at in the show notes with it, maybe a template of what that could be adopted for them if they want to incorporate something like this in. If you're happy to share some insights on that, I'm more than happy to listen, or we can also create something from that point of view. I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, we have something, our EMR system, our practice management system does it for us automatically. It gives a survey. But now, so the way we use it, it actually, we set up custom questions that are, it only lets us do 0 through 5.
Okay.
So we modify a little bit, but we do it per area, like the phone, reception, tech, doctor, optician. So now each person personally gets a score too, because they're responsible for a particular area. Yeah. And now our team can also be aligned to the patient experience and what they're getting.
And that's tied back to what you were speaking from the outset, where you've got your little areas and who's responsible and who are you delegating it to, and who's so that tie-in is again super strategic, and I think is really powerful and can be taken to the extreme, I feel, but also can start to adopt in smaller capacities. So I think that's a really, really interesting one, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. And with your, I guess, services that you provide, and I believe, you have that you're providing the centralized efficiency systems now for other practices. So you're not just for yourself and the 5 practices that you manage. When you see other practices and you get involved with this type of activity, what difference do you see from high-performing practices and practices that struggle?
A lot. I touch on one other point too with that, with what we talked about. So one thing you said, Google reviews, right? Google reviews is not a operational get better strategy. It is a marketing strategy.
Gotcha.
Pure and simple, right? It's not going to help you get better. It's going to help you get better reviews and get more people in the door. This is how do we get better strategic, better operations? Yeah,
that's a great distinction. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you want to see bad scores on this, right? Because you want to see the warts. And we ask questions in a way that's easy for us to see the warts without being exposed publicly, right?
Yeah, okay.
But by the way, heads up, you will get a couple of people will be like, oh yeah, I didn't like that experience. I'm going to leave a bad review. And it happens. I know it is what it is.
But it's a different mindset, I think, marketing and then operational, I think. And if you have this score, and that's why I like that. It's because it allows you to be strategic and then review and then feed that back into your continual evolution of what you're working on and improving on in areas of improvement, which obviously we need to be doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, exactly. And so what are you asked the question, what are some of the things I see that mistakes that people will make?
Yeah, well, I guess, when you're looking at I'll use the term high performing practice, but it could be like an effective and efficient practice compared to one that's struggling. What are you typically seeing, maybe even as being a barrier? Like, why can some be so good at it and others aren't? What are the main differences that you see there?
So a lot of it is I'll be honest, some of it is around just self-regulation, self-management, and emotional intelligence. Some of it is around lack of skills and knowing what to look at, where the bottlenecks are. Actually, I'd say those two are probably the biggest things that I see at a high level. From a tactical level, it is I see a lot of doctors prioritize lifestyle over the business.
Okay.
And I think that's a big one, right? It's like, because at least in the US, people get into this because they get easy lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's true. But if you really want the business to succeed, you have to treat it like a business and ROI, right? Like, hey, how much are you getting back? You can't just take a month off or whatever and not expect a business consequence. And so, or stalling out, right? And that's one thing. The other thing is not getting help from resources that are out there, not understanding how to do it. And, thinking you have all the answers, right? You can be really successful and get to even a couple locations in the US on your own and be really successful. But then getting to the next level requires some learning and expansion, which not everyone wants to get that help. And constantly being able to learn is a big part of that.
Yeah.
And I guess I probably have I still have a lot of learning to do myself, to be honest. Right. And so there's a lot that I always try to look for and see how I can level up and do that. At some point it becomes, hey, it's about the process. And some point it's about the people. You got having good people helps you get to the whole other level. In our business, it's also very much, it's not a software business. You're not going to have hockey stick growth, right? Unless you're first starting off and you go from $0 to $300,000 US dollars or whatever. That's the only time you're really going to have that. Outside of that, it's going to be slower growth. So stability sometimes is more important than perfection. And so if you have someone that's stable that you can work with, that's good, that lives your values, but it's not perfect at the job, ironically, sometimes it's better than try to find someone. And that's a mistake I personally have made, right? It's like, oh no, I have to have that perfect person. And that's not always the case. And so there's something to be said about that. And just honestly, just constant monitoring, like, hey, cadence, like daily meetings. How are you doing this? And it's a people business. So you have to stay on top of management. Management's a real thing. And too many doctors try to be the managers and the doctors, and it's hard to do both full time.
So I guess if you're in a situation where you are the doctor or the optometrist and the manager too. Or, in Australia, it is common for a dispenser or an optician to own the practice as well. And if they're doing both or playing both hats and they're juggling that, what tips would you have for them with regards to, being able to incorporate more strategy other than the obvious, make the time? Is there anything else that you could suggest to them?
If you all have groups, those groups are invaluable. Like we have a bunch here in the US that you can be a part of, private practices. I'm sure there's some in Australia.
Yeah.
We're socially created beings. And so just having, you are who you surround yourself with.
Absolutely.
If you're around other people who are trying to grow the business and getting ideas, that's there. Yeah. Even if it's not in optometry, there's other groups. We were talking about it before the call. I'm a part of a group called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, right? And so even entrepreneur groups help you think differently, think about your business differently. Anything you can do for that.
Yeah, I think that networking component is really critical, and it can be outside of industry too. Your experiences come outside of optics, and it's probably part of the reason why you've been able to do what you do, because, you didn't come up in the optical ecosystem as so many business owners traditionally do. And when they do, unless they're inherently business savvy from the outset and they've just had that skill or that ability, it's not something that comes naturally in our industry, which is also why the big corporates have been able to dominate the way that they have, because they do come with these systems and these processes, and they can, come as quite intimidating. But I think that's obviously changing more and more. You mentioned lifestyle and the lifestyle, I guess, of the owner, and you do see so many different types of businesses. And I guess what I would say is to anyone out there that, is resonating with stuff like this, and, you might not be able to control the environment that you're in, and you're very much, part of that process. It's important, if you're looking to involve yourself with a practice that is being successful or becoming successful, that you're looking for these types of, indicators. And this is a little bit, I guess, left field, but, if you want to be successful in the field and you don't necessarily want to be in a corporate, you want to go to more independent, when you're in that interview process, be sure to be asking the right questions. And this is probably a really different take on things. But, if someone's coming to interview at your store, it's going to be pretty clear what their expectations are. And that should give them confidence. They go to a traditional, and I use that term, loosely, but independent practice, is there going to be that process? Do you see that process? If you don't see it, what's it going to look like? Because that lifestyle can really determine the nature and the instance of that operation and the care factor that is applied to it or not. So, I think that's I guess just more of a general observation that I've seen and being mindful with that. Other than lifestyle, where else do you think most practice owners unintentionally hold themselves back?
So looking at their business as a expense versus an investment. So I can't tell how many times that's expensive. Okay, well, what's the trade-off? What would you have to see? It's an asset, right? Like if you're investing in the market, what do you expect as a return? Yeah. What are you going to get from this investment? Right? So, and actually I see them the opposite when they buy equipment. They're get excited about it. It's always sexy, fun. I can practice my medicine the way I want to practice. But they don't look at how many patients they need for it. They don't do the work to actually get more patients. And it ends up being $100,000 investment that should have been a profitable adventure for the office, but it wasn't. So ironic, and they don't spend on the people, they may not spend on the right in-office staff to get what they need, right? Or they may not spend money on the infrastructure, software that they'll help them grow and make things easier, systemize processes, so that they can deliver a great experience. I'm not understanding where to spend the money and how to spend it, and being too like a personal pocketbook versus a business.
And as we're sort of getting to the conclusion of the conversation, I've really enjoyed the discussion that we've had, Ankit. It's been really insightful, and I feel like the audience is going to get a lot out of this. If an optometrist or a practice owner, or manager, starts to want to start shifting their mindset in this regard, to focus more or to incorporate more of this business mentality, what tips would you have for them to shift from that operator, in the business, to sort of maybe be working more on the business mindset? Any tips for that? And I guess, why is it important to do that too?
Yeah, and look, it may not be, right? If you're happy with what you're doing, you're happy with the results, then it may be, if that's it depends on what you want. If you're wanting to grow, wanting to change and shift, there's a lot of different places to do it. Everyone's journey is going to be a little bit different. So what I would just say is exposure to new ideas, like your podcast. This is great. Or like being a part of a group just to hear different ideas, and then trying to come back and synthesize it. So setting some time aside every week to do that, working on the business, even if it's like an hour, just in your own space, thinking about what could I do with the business? What do I want to accomplish? What's the major gap that's holding me back? And how can I get around that gap? What is the one constraint, basically, right? So I gave a whole bunch of ways to find a constraint, but just pick the one thing that you want to work on, and how do you come around, and just spend a little bit of time just thinking about what you would do to tackle it, and getting exposed to other areas of resources that could find that for you, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's like your podcast. You'll start noticing and hearing things once you start focusing on it. Even though you're only spending like one small bit of time reflecting on it, that'll help the snowball effect. And over the course of a year, 2 years, you'll see a massive impact to the business.
Yeah, and you speak to the purpose of the podcast in that particular comment, because it's just that spawning of one thought. And once that thought takes place, where it can take you is I guess limitless from that point of view. And so, yeah, I definitely encourage people, if they are curious about this, to reach out from that point of view and sort of see what that might look like. I think success leaves clues. People have done it before. We are an industry that's it's very well evolved. And so there have been a lot of successful people in it, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel by any means. It can be seen. It's about connecting with that person that you might aspire to be or to emulate, and getting tips. And the one thing I've learned more and more with this industry is it is very giving. I mean, even in the example of the podcast, people share their story. They share insights. They do want to help. And so it is out there. And if you seek, I guess you shall find, from the point of view of that concept. One group of people that we see, and I see, I wouldn't say disheartened is the right term, but and this is very much Australia related, with regards to the landscape of optometry. We have a lot of universities now that have optometry in school as an offering. 20, 30, 40 years ago, there was 2 or 3. Now there's 7 or 8. And what that's doing is it's increasing the number of optometrists that are out and about. Now the opportunities aren't represented as much as what they once were. So younger optoms that are coming through, and in the conversations I'm having with them, are really curious about independent optometry, because it allows for them to create their own business and not necessarily be reliant on a contract from a corporate, which has always sort of been something that they've strived to. And the last couple of years is the first time that I'm hearing some younger optoms are not getting jobs, first year out of uni, and they're sort of struggling. So I guess this is really pitched at those individuals. So younger optometrists or first-time owners that are, I guess, early on in their journey, and I guess probably not so much exposed to the business side of the industry. What tips would you have for them, and what sort of advice could you offer them, I guess, at that initial part of their career, whether they want to venture into independence, they're in corporate, or they're coming at the end of their uni exposure and they're like, well, this is something that I'm interested in. What can I do?
So it's funny. I actually host a podcast in the US called Optometrists Building Empires, where I interview optometrists. And this is the question I usually ask them, is reflecting back on when you were a student right out of school, what would you give yourself as advice?
It's a bit like that, yeah.
And so I'll tell you what I hear a lot, and I'll tell you my experiences too. What I hear a lot is take the chances and do things earlier. That's one of the most common things I heard. The other one I hear is be patient. So basically the message is, if you feel like you have a pattern in your behavior of being too slow or too fast, try the other way, right? And just try something different is what I hear from most of those messages. Learn, absorb information. So get the basic business skills too. That's just from a tactical standpoint. Learn business and learn some basic finances. It's super easy to do that now with all the online courses and YouTube, ChatGPT. Like be careful with that. But you can learn stuff much easier now on basic math, how to do things, and then get some mentors. Find some people, build mentors. Reach out to people from your podcast. A lot of them are probably willing to be mentors to tell people like, hey, this is how I built it. And some people may find a mentor that can help you kind of guide you through the process. That's another common theme that I see with a lot of folks. They had mentors to help them.
And I guess as we wrap up this podcast, and I think that was a great tip, I want to ask you the same question, but as opposed to you asking the question I just asked and the response being what they normally say, if you look back on your journey so far, what's one operational or business decision or something that, I guess, if you were to go back to starting out, from the point of view of getting involved in optics and the business of optics, what would be the one thing that you would provide as a bit of advice or one learning that you've come across that's, I guess, helped you the most throughout your journey that we can pass on to the audience as a bit of advice and tips from your point of view?
I'll speak from my personal experience. My own personal experience is I'm not as smart as I think. So I think that was, being, and then this proverb actually, it's more about this. So it's an African proverb. It's basically, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So for me, it's really around how to build a team out that can do this now.
Yeah.
I've been, in my previous businesses in the past, I've been able to kick and drag and scream businesses to a decent size. Now I keep hitting a wall, and it's like, okay, well, what's next? It's like, okay, how do I build a team to do this? And how do I empower them and grow that? And so that is sort of where my next phase of my journey is. But I think that's something I would have started off earlier, is
Right.
That mentality of, okay, yes, I need to know the skills myself, but I also need to learn how to encourage and motivate and build that team around me.
Yeah, and it's probably why you affiliate with that concept of, learning. I mean, I've got an analogy that I use all the time, which is every day is a school day. And, it's almost like, there's always something to learn, and you realize that at the end of the day, it's like, wow, I learned something about that today that I didn't ever know. The concept and the power of the team is effective. And I guess it's about there's no I in team, but there's you in group kind of thing. And it's, you've got to get it all happening, and you've got to get that team sort of firing. And that success, I think, is in independent optometry is really where you have that. You can't do anything on your own. You do rely on a team, and a solid team at that, and being strategic in that is really important. So I really appreciate your insights, your thoughts. They've been super insightful. You've mentioned some content that people can refer to, your podcast, your book. We'll have all of those in the show notes. So if anyone's interested in getting those pieces of, information, look at the show notes and feel free to investigate and explore. Ankit, if people want to get in touch with you, I'm assuming you're open to that. And if so, what's the best way that they can get in touch to ask you any questions based on anything that we've discussed today, or anything else for that matter?
Yeah, my email is ankit@mybcat.com. Is the easiest way to get a hold of me. See LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can find me there.
Yeah.
Those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me.
Cool. We'll put those in the show notes too, so people can reach out accordingly. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I really appreciate your insights, and all the best.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
Thanks for listening to The Focused View. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review, subscribe on your preferred podcast app, and share it with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals across Australia. For additional resources and downloads, visit thefocusedview.com.au. I'm Michael Nasser. Until next time, keep focused.